Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another show of Inspirate, the show which is here to enlighten you, to empower you, to inspire you. We're dealing with a very important theme for this series, this being season 5 of Inspirate. And we have experienced something which is unprecedented. Our entire fabric of society has been ravaged by this pandemic, this COVID-19 pandemic, which has impacted every facet of our lives. And the question now, which is the theme for this series, is can we do things normally? Is life able to return to normality, or do we have to look at things in a different way? We have two esteemed guests in Mr. Cas Kuvadia, who is currently with Business Unity South Africa, previously with the Banking Council of South Africa. We also have on a Zoom call Mr. Shoaib Musa, who is the CEO of the Willerton Group, also very involved with charity foundations, as well as with regarding COVID, the Giving for Hope Foundation, which is around helping relief funding for SMMEs. Specifically, we want to be talking about funding for SMMEs, and I'll start with Shoaib. Shoaib, when the pandemic hit us earlier this year in March, I know that the Willerton Group played a very active role in terms of being able to assist SMMEs. How did it come about, Shoaib?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair. Firstly, just to clarify also, I am not the CEO of Willerton Group. I'm actually the Chief Commercial Officer. But thank you for giving me the status of being CEO. So, Yusuf, to your point, when the outbreak of COVID became a reality within South Africa, and the president announced the first lockdown in the third week of March, what was going to be very obvious was that a number of our small and medium businesses were going to be profoundly affected. And I think, alhamdulillah, we came to the realization fairly quickly that something needed to be done. And hence, the business or certain partners of our business, more particularly my brother Zubair, who is our CEO, conceived of this idea of the Giving for Hope Foundation, which we would utilize then primarily to assist existing businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, to give them relief funding in terms of COVID aid, primarily with the intention to ensure that these businesses have the capability to survive. And one of the most important preconditions of this was ensuring also that it was not just survival of businesses, but also continuity of employment. So what we tried to do is we tried to ensure that when we looked at the levels or the types of businesses that we were intending to fund, we needed to look also at the number of permanent employees that they had in their business pre-COVID, the intention being that we wanted to keep the employment numbers unchanged. And that really was the intention.
Yes, so what comes out very strongly is, of course, that with regards COVID, it has come as an awakening for us as humanity, as society, and specifically in South Africa. There's been a bloodbath in terms of job losses. There's been a major contraction of the economy. We're starting to see this glaring inequality, and I think that has come out very strongly, not even in South Africa, but if you take it globally as well, but specifically in South Africa. With previous to COVID, we were already talking of one of the highest Gini coefficients in the world, in a sense that we have this such glaring gap between the haves and the have-nots. Cas, business how is business able to deal with this glaring inequality? Is it a tool that can be used to be able to create jobs, to be able to somehow eradicate this imbalance?
Assalamu alaikum, and thanks for the opportunity to participate on your show. So I think COVID has been and will continue to be a significant event in our lives and globally. I think what it's done, besides the obvious health implications and the number of infections the world has seen and the number of deaths that the world has seen, is that it's made more stark the inequalities in society. It's made more stark the issues of poverty, of inequality. It's made worse in the South African situation, our unemployment problem. And so in rebuilding the economy, which certainly Business Unity South Africa and the Black Business Council came together to establish a platform called Business for South Africa, through which we enabling business broadly to participate in COVID interventions, as well as putting together some sort of a strategy for rebuilding our economy. And in rebuilding our economy, there is absolutely no doubt that we have to rebuild an economy that is inclusive, that is equitable, that enables the majority of the people in this country to have a stake in that economy, be it through employment, be it through enterprise development, be it in other ways. And we've been working, so during COVID, we've been part of a rapid response team at NEDLAC, which has been making the necessary interventions to limit the impact of COVID. So we've brought business capacity and expertise to bear in the distribution of UIF payments. Had lots of problems in the early days. In the later days, started flowing until they picked up issues of possible corruption, but we brought business expertise to bear on that. We've worked with government and other stakeholders to manage the various lockdowns to ensure that businesses, as they were implementing the health protocols and the protocols of the lockdowns, we learned as we went, and so gazettes were then amended accordingly. We've been working with stakeholders to see how we manage the transport situation. We've done a lot of work in the initial stages, and we continue to do so in bringing PPE into the country, and worked with government to put together the Solidarity Fund, which in the initial stages put up close to R1 billion to bring PPE into the country. And we have learned through that, and now in working with looking at local manufacturing of PPE, there are close to 39 odd local companies now that are actually producing PPEs in the country. So we've done a lot of that work, and then we put together a team to develop an economic recovery strategy, which is a public document now, and we engaging government and other stakeholders on that strategy currently.
Yes, you make some great points there. I mean, I like what you're saying around the local manufacturing. So as much as there's this challenge with regards the COVID pandemic, there are also these opportunities with regards, 39 local manufacturers of PPE. At the same time, I think we can't get away from the fact that the elephant in the room, so to say, is this corruption. This corruption that's is a pandemic in itself. And it's wide, right? It's government, it's every facet of our society. So I think we need to really focus on that before we can even move to some sort of solutions and so on. How do we deal with that in terms of from a business perspective, Shoaib, as well as from a broader perspective, from a policy perspective? How do we deal with that? Shoaib, maybe I'll come to you in terms of corruption. How are you guys dealing with it? Shoaib?
Apologies, Yusuf. You know, they say the most famous saying in the world right now is you're on mute. So forgive me for that. Yusuf, I think firstly from a business point of view, alhamdulillah, we have been quite lucky in that we don't necessarily engage directly with government in terms of having to supply them. And so from a tender point of view, a supply point of view, it's not really an issue that we come across daily. But having said that, corruption does have a major impact on us almost in every step and in every part of our relationship with government, one way or the other. And whether it's at local government level or provincial level or national level. I mean, I think pandemic is perhaps too kind a word to use. This is probably far more widespread than a pandemic. And, you know, the concern that we have is, in many instances, it's almost, you know, less than 50%, I believe, of the revenue of this country or what is being spent in this country is actually being spent properly. And it's actually giving value that it should give. And, you know, the longer this continues, the worse it's going to become. Now, if we look at the state of corruption, you know, we had a bit of a tragic incident within my greater family a few weeks.
Shoaib, I'm going to just interrupt you. We just got to take a break. Immediately after the break, we can continue on this very, very important aspect Shoaib mentioned, greater than even a pandemic, being corruption. Immediately after the break, we'll continue the show. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to Inspirate. We are talking around SMME funding. We're talking around the pandemic that has ravaged our society. Just before the break, Shoaib Musa from the Willerton Group was sharing his insights practically as a businessman around the even greater pandemic. He says pandemic is too light a word in the sense that corruption that is ravaging our society. Shoaib, you can continue.
Thanks, Yusuf. So, you know, as I was saying before the break, we had a tragic incident with a family member whose part of their factory burned down in Pietermaritzburg about 10 days ago. And, you know, the sad thing, and this is a direct indication and a direct result of what is happening in the country, is this fire would have been well controlled had our fire services been maintained in an efficient, proper, orderly manner. 3/4 of the fire engine fleet within Pietermaritzburg were broken down, okay? And whatever they had available was insufficient to be able to control the fire. Now, this in itself tells you that as we progress as a country, unless we do something to stop this and ensure that the funds are redirected correctly, I'm really worried about where we're going to go. And I mean, the scary thing for me is that the discussion that's been circulating around the Pietermaritzburg business community over the last few days has been, should we perhaps look at now trying to contract our fire protection to a private fire service? We've done that with almost everything else, with our security, our healthcare. And it seems that we have to do more to protect ourselves in this country. And is that really how we can live? And it's a worrying aspect that not just is endemic within government, but remember, I think it's also endemic within business itself. Small business, big business. And it's a plague that affects the whole spectrum of South African society.
Yes, and Kes, I mean, you coming from this policy perspective, this strategic document that you talk about, which is this inclusive framework for a recovery plan to take us, I mean, let's be honest, as South Africans, we know in the beginning of the lockdown, we were also hit with this junk status. So we pretty much on our knees. And it's about how we can rebuild this economy with all the challenges. I mean, Shaib talking about on a micro level, practicality, our services, essential services being broken down. How do we rid ourselves of the scourge of corruption? Kes?
Okay, so I think this is a scourge. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And in our document as well, we identify corruption as one of the most critical inhibitors to sustain growth in our country and investment in our country. Let us just look at what's happening recently. So I think the statement by the president on Monday after the ANC's NEC meeting was probably the strongest statement coming out of the ruling party. And I think we need to welcome that, but we also need to now say that the ruling party has agreed, according to the president at the National Executive Committee meeting, that any member of the ANC charged with a crime like corruption or looting or whatever will be asked to step aside or will be suspended. And we now need to see that happening so that we can at least start getting some confidence going in the country. Today, we've also just released a statement from NEDLAC, which has been signed off by the NEDLAC social parties, which is business, labor, government, and community groups, strongly condemning the corruption in the PPE environment. I think, and that is important. The Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, as you would know, has started a campaign together with the South African Council of Churches and so on. I spoke at one of their webinars a week ago on a Sunday. And I think we need to mobilize as a society against the corruption, against the looting. I think business needs to take action against its own people. So certainly we absolutely clear at Business Unity South Africa that if any of our members are seen to be or involved in corruption, we will suspend them until the outcome of any cases. And we need to be absolutely clear about that. We need to keep the pressure on government to actually take action against people in government who are charged with corruption. And we need to be absolutely serious about this. We also need to, I mean, we keep on saying we need to see people in orange overalls, which is correct. The National Prosecuting Authority, whose head Shamila now is a good, capable person, keeps on saying that they need to build cases so that they are sure that those cases stand up in court when they prosecute, which is also correct. So I think that what we need to do is, from the scarce resources we have as a country, we need to, instead of plowing resources into projects that have neither an economic or social return, we should divert some money to the National Prosecuting Authority and increase their capacity to prepare good cases, but to do so speedily and get them to court. So I think it's a multifaceted approach, but as society, we need to mobilize and we need to begin to show that we haven't, as a society, lost our moral compass. Because the way things are looking now, it appears that as a society, we have lost our moral compass.
Yes, and what I'm hearing is this inclusivity. I think what's, again, with a negative is always, I believe, a positivity that comes out of it. And what you're starting to see is civic organizations, business organizations, business people, then government, and good people in government all getting together, the labor organizations, you're even looking at your faith-based organizations getting together and fighting against an element, which that being an important pandemic, this being corruption. Now, if we take that same principles and now work it toward building a better socio-economic environment for South Africans, with this that we spoke about as well, this inequality, and business being a key driver, especially small businesses. How do we galvanize small businesses to be able to become the employment agencies for this economy? I mean, our people are hungry, our people need jobs, and small businesses are a key driver for this. How would we be able to do this? Shoaib, I mean, I know you guys have created a very successful business and international organization, and you started obviously from humble beginnings. How have you done it?
Look, I think the one thing that people need to realize, people need to accept, is that nothing comes easy. There's no such thing that, you just sit there and it's going to come. You have to work for it. You have to be prepared to work hard. You have to be passionate. You have to be dedicated. You have to be loyal. So firstly, they often talk about the millennials of today, whose primary aim is to work as little and earn as much as possible. And I think that is perhaps endemic of our society. I met a youngster about 2 or 3 years ago, and just in discussion with him, I asked him, so what are you going to be what are you going to do when you finish university? He says, I don't even think I want to finish university. I just want to become a entrepreneur. And that is a sad indication of our society today. And, we know the president has said it time and time again, that ultimately the engine room for the economy is going to be our SMMEs, particularly our smaller businesses that employ up to 5 people. And that is where the easiest, quickest, fastest opportunity is going to be for South Africans and for South Africans to start seeing real growth. The one big problem is the lack of funding opportunities for these entrepreneurs to be able to start up these businesses. But also, by the same token, I think we need to go back a few steps. I think we need to look at our education system. That is our schooling education, is our tertiary education teaching our people the right skills to be able to run businesses? Because the other problem, as you often see, is people start businesses, and the moment they make 10 Rand or 20 Rand, they want to spend it before even worrying about paying the creditors. So the level of education needs to be increased, because if we are going to be an entrepreneur-based economy, then respectfully, we need to also then ensure that the people have the right skills in order to be able to take it forward. But having said that, I think the other opportunity has to really come from not only from government, but also from business itself. Yusuf, we sit in a position where, as you quite rightly said, the wealth gap in this country is probably at one of the most extremes in the world. I've read often that the differential between the lowest paid employee and the CEO of a business shouldn't be more than a maximum of maybe 25 to 30 times. But in South Africa, we see those differentials in many of our bigger businesses sitting at sometimes 300-400 times. And I think it's an indication of, for me, that big business needs to play a more active role in helping to develop and generate growth within the smaller parts of the economy. And that is an opportunity that we are not embracing and that we are not taking up as we should.
Okay, Shoaib's mentioned something very, very important, this being this entrepreneurial-based economy. Also doing things differently. This gap between the haves and the have-nots has to be dealt with if we are to create a better future for our children and for future generations in our country as well as in Africa and the rest of the world. Immediately after the break, let's explore this entrepreneurial-based economy. Welcome back to Inspirate, the show that's here to enlighten, empower, and inspire you. Just before the break, we were talking about this entrepreneurial-based economy. I want to bring in Cas Kuvadia from Business Unity South Africa. Cas, business, especially small business, the world over, is seen as one of the key employers of an economy, a key driver for the economy. We've been told in South Africa, small business only contributes about 60% of employment, whereas the rest of the world, sometimes even small businesses go up to 90, 95%. Is this an indictment on us? What can we do differently? We also realize that big business has to play a role. Shoaib mentioned that before the break. How do we, from a policy perspective, from this inclusive framework that we talk about, bringing in all the stakeholders, how do we ensure that we get business to be this driver for the economy? Cas?
Okay, so let me just agree with the point that Shoaib made. I think the issue about an entrepreneurial spirit, our education, our culture, enterprise is hard. It's not easy. I'm sure Shoaib will tell you how long it took them to build their business and how tough it was. And we need to continue to emphasize that. And everybody is not going to be an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship is hard. And we need to ensure that people understand that. Having said that, I think it is absolutely clear that we need to do much more to promote small and medium enterprises in our country. Again, our document talks at length about that. Our document says that SME development is a critical element of rebuilding our economy. Now, there's a couple of elements to this and what we've done. So one, I think that we're advocating for reducing red tape and making it easy for businesses to start, to be licensed, and to operate in South Africa, particularly for SMEs, because there's too many touch points in government to actually start a business, get the licensing. It takes too long. We should be able to do all of that electronically, and we should be able to do that within a couple of days. And it should be cheap and it should be easy. Secondly, I think that we need to develop a framework in this country where when we talk about SME finance, we're not only talking about debt finance, because that's what we tend to do. We have a very undeveloped small and medium enterprise venture capital market in this country. We don't have things like angel financing in this country. And I think what we need to do, and we're beginning to do that, is to bring banks, venture capitalists, and others together to see how we can actually develop an infrastructure of different types of mixes of finance for SMEs so that SMEs can have access to such finance. We're also going to be advocating, and this is something that's been on the table for years, but again, we need to increase that, advocating for bigger businesses and government to pay SMEs on time, to pay them in 30 days and not drag them on for 60, 90, 120 days, because that has an impact on the cash flow. Then we are looking at and talking to authorities about whether there are possibilities of some sort of tax assistance for SMEs to make it easier for them to manage their taxes properly. We've put together an SME team and a digitalization team to look at, so during COVID, e-commerce has gone up significantly. And we need to now find ways and means of enabling SMEs to leverage off that, for SMEs to get into e-commerce far more effectively and far more in a far more bigger way than they have been up to now. So we're looking at a number of these issues. We're also absolutely clear that bigger corporates must ensure that they have SMEs in their value chains, in their procurement value chains, and we need to enable that to happen. So there's a whole range of stuff happening at the moment. The credit guarantee fund established by the banks and the Reserve Bank is beginning to service SMEs. There's a Sukuma fund which Rupert put together and is being managed by business partners, and that's beginning to look at how they can fund SMEs. So there's a whole range of things happening. What we need to do is we need to make sure that we coordinate all of that and we all play our role as government, business, and labor, because we need to look at what sort of labor dispensations we need to enable SMEs to actually manage employment and be able to actually employ people without going through too many hassles. And we need to coordinate all of that into a real concerted effort to build and develop SMEs in our country.
Kes, you mentioned the relief funds, right? Now, just yesterday, the Minister of Small Business was saying that with regards that fund, that was quite a unique fund in the sense that government has come in and backed it from guarantees, and then the banks are supposed to be providing relief funding for small to medium-sized enterprises. Yet the reality which the Minister of Small Business is saying is that Black businesses who are in need of this funding has not been the recipients mainly of these funds. Now, that's another, again, an issue which is something that we need to deal with, is how do Black businesses actually access these funds? Is this not a challenge that we are facing, banks also being averse to be able to just fund on risk? How do we deal with this?
Well, this is one of the points I made. So banks are going to be averse to risk. Banks lend your money and my money. And they're going to lend their money in a way that they have a reasonable certainty that that money will be paid back. The one thing we cannot do is we cannot respond to COVID or address the SME issue and any other issue in a way that puts the financial sector at risk, because we have a very well operating financial sector, particularly banking sector, and we need to be proud of that. But having said that, we need to see how government and banks can work together, but also bring in venture capitalists and other types of funders that are structured in a way that they can take greater risk than just debt funders, and see how we have a mix of funding to enable SMEs to actually operate and thrive. No SMEs, no business, I'm sure Shoaib will tell you, no business can survive on debt funding alone. And no SME in particular can survive on debt funding alone. So we need to create that architecture of funding, a mix of funding. But having said that as well, I mean, yesterday at NEDLAC, actually, we had the discussion on the Credit Guarantee Fund, and somebody from National Treasury was there. And what's also happening, what's also certainly the banking sector tells me, is that the demand for this funding from SMEs has not been great, because many SMEs don't want to get into more debt at this point in time. They are managing to the extent they can. And this is debt finance. This isn't a giveaway. This isn't structured in a way that it's going to be, money is going to be lent in a way that there isn't a reasonable possibility of that money coming back, because neither the banking industry nor government has the resources to actually do lending in a way that money will not come back, or there isn't a possibility of the money coming back. So I think that if there are issues in the fund, and I know that the Reserve Bank, together with the industry, are trying to work on weaknesses in the fund, and they're trying to cover those. But I think we shouldn't kid ourselves that there are resources in this country that can be made available ad infinitum without those resources coming back in some form or other. And we also need to really concentrate on developing an architecture with a mix of funding for SMEs, so that there are venture capitalists that are prepared to walk with the SMEs as those SMEs develop. And then there are debt funders that can actually provide the operating funding and working capital and so on. And that's the way we need to look at this.
Yeah, look, one such architecture that you mentioned, something that's innovative, was actually this Giving for Hope Foundation that Willerton has been very actively involved in. And what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about that. I mean, Shoaib, on your side, how has that actually panned out? I mean, Cass is saying with the relief fund from government, you also get in SMMEs that are slightly hesitant, not to get into deeper debt. How are you finding it with the Giving for Hope Foundation? Shoaib?
No, absolutely. So I concur with almost everything that Cass has just mentioned now. We've got to measure ourselves with a level of responsibility as well. And I mean, the one thing that South Africa has got going very, very strongly in its favor is that we have probably one of the most well-established and best governed system of banks in this country. And it's an asset that you don't want to impact on substantially. Now, understanding that and the fact, and Cass is correct, we have found the exact same thing, that what has happened over here is when we started the fund, we had a deluge of applications for substantial funding. And I think firstly, a lot of the people that had applied for funding didn't understand the concept of what we were trying to do. But secondly, also, we have to be responsible. The fund's trustees and the fund's administrators have to be responsible. There is no such thing as free handouts, okay? The expectation is that those that you lend to, you give them a payment holiday. Alhamdulillah, the benefit of our fund was that it is obviously free of any interest or any profit. But you also need to measure the capability of those that have applied and the ability of theirs to be able to pay in the future. And the reality is we were an economy that was already in strife before COVID. So a lot of businesses that were already experiencing financial problems pre-COVID would not have qualified for funding. And I think if you look at the uptake of a number of these relief funds that have been created, both by civil society, by the private sector, and by government, the uptake has not been to the expectation that all of us expected it to be. And that is because also I think people have realized that there's a limitation to how much of debt you can take. And to Cass's point, and it is 100% correct as well, you cannot start a business or run a business being over indebted. There needs to be a balance as well. And I think that is where a level of expectation needs to be managed within the startup environment. Angel funds are important, venture capitalists are important, and all of these need to come together ultimately to help generate where we need to go and where we want to go.
Thank you. That was a great session. Immediately after the break, we'll get to the discussions around this architecture, this new innovative architecture that we're talking about in terms of funding, and let's explore that further. See you after the break. Welcome back to Inspirate. We're talking SMME funding, and we've had an insightful discussion around not being totally exposed to debt, which has been a culture of our country when it comes to funding businesses. We've also identified that education is very, very important. We've also identified one of the hindrances to our country's growth has been corruption, and us as an inclusive society dealing with the scourge of corruption. In this last segment, I want to focus now, and as our ethos of Inspirate is about, is providing hope for our people, is that a businessman that's out there and wants to start up a business or is running a business, maybe extremely indebted, we talk about this new architecture of bringing in angel investors, bringing in big businesses that can help smaller businesses. How do we see that panning out on a practical level, Cass?
Okay, so I think that what we need to do is, one, there are some government agencies that are actually set up and funded to assist small medium enterprises to get into business and to grow their businesses. I think we need to ensure that those are brought into the net of coordinating this and do actually undertake the responsibility that they are given with taxpayers' funds. So there are agencies that are funded by government to provide non-financial support to SMEs. I think we need to bring those to bear. We need to communicate those agencies better so that SMEs know they are there and they can be contacted and they can be assisted. Secondly, I think that coming out of COVID, we need to leverage off this. So we will certainly, as Business for South Africa, start talking about pretty soon on how we've learned lessons in the localization and local manufacturing of PPEs, and how we are leveraging off that to actually broaden our involvement in localization, development of local manufacturers, assisting of local manufacturers, and how we're going to bring big business and smaller business together to actually enable that to happen. And so I think that what we need is, one, we need to coordinate all these activities. We need to communicate better where services are available, be they financial or non-financial services. We need to, and this is one of the sort of immediately implementable issues we're talking to government about, cutting the red tape to establish businesses, to regularize SMEs so that small and medium businesses look forward to being registered properly for tax purposes and so on, so that it's not onerous on them. And I think we need to bring all of that together into a package, that we communicate properly, that we have mechanisms through which SMEs can contact all of these touch points properly and easily, so that we then begin to instill a message and action that says we want to actually increase the extent of our SMEs from the 60% they are in at now to about 90%.
Yeah, Shoaib, if someone was to give me a silver bullet now and says, how do you solve the SMME problem? I'd say, just look at what Willerton has done in terms of their history, and then let's just replicate that. Is it as easy as that, Shoaib?
I wish it was. Look, I mentioned earlier that a large part of the success is loyalty, dedication, passion, but ultimately hard work. But look, there's also there also is as well an element of luck in it as also. But I strongly believe that you make your own luck, and I think everybody, we need to look at growing and fostering originality in this country. The one thing that I've noticed is when a lot of applications have come through for startup SMME funding, people just want to effectively do what everybody else is doing, and more often than not in overtraded markets. But there are other opportunities that need to be looked at where growth can come, and where growth can come very well. And I think that we need to start thinking out of the box. We need to start fostering an era of creativity more than anything else. And consequently, it can only be through that I think we will see success. Just to look at what your neighbor is doing and say, I'm going to do the same thing, is not necessarily the right answer.
Yes, I mean, you talk of innovation, and I mean, looking at us as South Africans, we have some unique traits that differentiates us from the rest of the world. Cass, you were talking about our manufacturing capabilities and harnessing that. our creative force as South Africans. I think when we've shown it in other elements when it came to the 2010 World Cup and what a World Cup we pulled off, as well as, I mean, even just in terms of our transition into democracy, it's about leveraging all of that creative force, that innovation within our broader demographics. You know, that being, you know, the various races in our country, all galvanizing toward, you know, creating a uniquely South African identity on a business level as well. And then taking advantage of this digitalization that you speak about as well, Cass. Maybe your parting words before we close the show.
I think we have the capability as South Africans to come together, as we've shown during the COVID pandemic. We've come together to actually deal with the pandemic. But we can't continue to come together only in situations of crisis. We need to have developed that South African patriotism that brings us together all the time. And I think we need to also just understand that it's very difficult to do that when we have an economy that's on its knees. I think you mentioned that earlier on in the program. And we do need to accept that we are in an economic crisis. We do need to accept that we will be competing when we go out into the market for money, which we will need to do, with countries that will also be out there to raise funds to rebuild their own economies. And we start at a disadvantage because we are in sub-investment grade status. So we do need to create an environment and come together as a country to agree that we need to create an environment to attract investment into the country and to attract local business to invest in the country. And that means creating an environment that gives them the confidence to do so. And then off the back of those investments, build an inclusive, sustained economic growth path. And that's what raises confidence. That's what brings people together, because people then start seeing the benefits of that. So I think that there are some hard decisions we need to take. There are going to be trade-offs along the way across the board, and we need to agree to make trade-offs as and when we need to. But without those hard decisions, creating an environment for investment and growth, we're not going to be able to deal with the crisis we are in. So let's concentrate our efforts on that.
Okay, so just in closing, what I'd like to do is throw a crystal ball to both you gentlemen and say, we're sitting here in, let's say, 5 years' time, and how do you see this country of ours operating? 5 years' time, if we do the right things. I'll leave it with you, Shoaib.
Well, I keep telling people my crystal ball is broken, but you know, I think this country we almost have a crossroads now. You know, we are on our knees economically, almost politically. The level of social protest is continuing to increase. And consequently, you know, we can go one of two ways. I think if the scourge of corruption continues unabated, it's not looking very good. And I don't want to go down that road. But I'm going to adopt a more positive outlook and say, you know, the positives that have come out, for example, from this from the NEC meeting of this last weekend, as well as, you know, the steps being taken, and sometimes, albeit they may seem very small steps, I think we seem to we often fail to understand that to undo what has been done takes lots of small steps to come together, and the small steps that government have been taking to try to undo the ravages of the past, I think you're going to start seeing all of that come to fruition, inshallah, over the next few years. And I think, you know, also we must take advantage. There's no doubt that when this economic crisis created by COVID comes to an end, we're going to see a very nice, substantial growth trajectory over the next few years, which almost is to take us back to the basis that we were in 2019. But we need to ride the crest of that wave. And instead of accepting a 3 or 4% growth for the economy, we need to look at trying to make it better and work together to achieve more. If others can do it, I see no reason why we can't.
Riding that crest of the wave with 30 seconds left, Cass, if I throw that crystal ball to you, how do you see it? Are we riding the wave or are we going to be crashing?
No, I think if we come together as a country, and we've been quite clear that we all need to put our shoulders to the wheel. If we come together as a country, we take the correct turn, not at crossroads, but at a T-junction. We got one of two choices. And we take the hard decisions to grow our economy. It puts us onto a long, hard road to growth, economic and social growth. And it is going to be a long and a hard road given where we are. But if we do that, if we make those choices, and if we make those correct choices, I think in 5 years' time, we will begin to see economic growth. We will begin to see us having the fiscal space to address the social issues we need to address. And I think it will bring the country together. But we've got to make those right choices and the hard choices now, not tomorrow, now.
Thank you. On that note, with the choices that is left to us as individuals, as a collective society, as all facets of our stakeholders in this country, that being government, that being business, that being civil society, faith-based organizations, all galvanizing, there is hope with what has been discussed over this last hour. We're hearing that, yes, we are faced with major challenges. We are at a T-junction, yet in the choices that we make will determine the future. And we always believe, as Inspirate, we say that we're here to inspire, enlighten, and empower. And I believe it starts with each one of us. Corruption, we may complain about government or whomever that is in corruption, but we need to look at ourselves as well. Are we involved in any corrupt activities? It all starts as the individual. What can we do to eradicate this gap between the rich and the poor? What are we doing in terms of empowering people as well? On that light, we thank you for another wonderful show of Inspirate. We'd like to thank our guests, Mr. Cass Kovadia from Business Unity South Africa. Thank you for your time and your insights. Thank you, Shoaib Musa, the Chief Commercial Officer, not the Chief Executive Officer of the Willerton Group. Thank you so much for your time. I know you guys are very busy. Thank you for your time. And on that score, we wish to see you on many of our other shows where we discuss this pandemic and how it's affected our lives and how we can create a better and improved, a new way of living in our country, in our continent, and on the globe. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.